Chosen one. This moment did not find you by chance, and this message is not arriving early or late. It is arriving on time in the exact Kairos moment written for you before you took your first breath. You are not watching this because of curiosity, but because a sealed scroll connected to your destiny is beginning to open. Heaven's clock has struck the appointed hour, and what has been hidden, delayed, or misunderstood is now being revealed. Chosen one. You are standing at the edge of a divine unlocking, a sacred unveiling that could shift your understanding, your faith, and even the direction of your life today, tonight, or in the coming days. Scripture reminds us that to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, as written in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 1, and this is your season of revelation. The Lord's Prayer was never meant to be repeated without power. It was designed as a living code, a divine pattern meant to awaken what God placed inside you. As Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 3 declares, the vision waits for the appointed time, but when it speaks, it will not lie. Anointed one, prepare your heart, still your spirit, and lean in with reverence, because this is not just teaching, it is activation, and heaven is ready to move as you begin to see what Jesus was truly revealing all along. Chosen one, before we decode words, before we touch doctrine, before we approach meaning, we must begin where Jesus began, with breath. Not metaphorical breath, not poetic language, but the living inhale and exhale moving through your body right now. This message is not arriving to inform your mind. It is arriving to awaken your memory. Heaven is intervening in this Kairos moment because something sealed inside you is responding. I know this because I have lived through seasons where prayer felt hollow, where I said holy words, but felt no presence, where faith became routine instead of encounter. And it was never because God was distant. It was because I had forgotten how to breathe the prayer instead of performing it. Chosen one. The Lord's Prayer was never meant to be recited. It was meant to be entered. Jesus did not offer it as a script to impress heaven, but as a doorway back into alignment. When he said, "Pray like this," he was not teaching repetition, he was teaching activation. And if you are still here listening, it is because your spirit recognizes that something more is being unlocked right now. This is the hour written for you, the appointed time, when what was hidden begins to surface, just as Scripture whispers that the vision appears at the appointed time and does not lie. Let us begin with the first line, because everything else depends on it. Our Father, chosen one. This is not an introduction. This is a collapse of separation. I remember the first time this truth landed in me, not in a church service, but alone, exhausted, feeling disconnected. The word "our" broke something open. Not my Father, not your Father, our. In that moment, something softened. The striving stopped. The loneliness cracked. I realized prayer was never meant to be an individual climbing toward God, but a remembering that we were never alone to begin with. When Jesus said Father, he was not pointing to a distant ruler in the sky. He was pointing to source, breath giver, origin, the one you came from before shame, before failure, before identity fractures. Chosen one, you did not begin in error. You did not originate in brokenness. You came from intention, from divine breath. And when you pray this line with awareness, you are not trying to convince God to hear you. You are allowing yourself to remember who you are speaking as, and who art in heaven. This is where religion trained us to look up. But Jesus never pointed upward when he spoke of heaven. He pointed inward. Heaven, as Jesus revealed it, is not a location. It is a dimension, a state of alignment, a realm within you that was never touched by trauma, never corrupted by fear, never altered by disappointment. I have felt this place in moments of stillness, when everything external was chaotic. yet something inside remained untouched. That is heaven. And when you speak this line consciously, you are not reaching for God. You are calling yourself back into alignment with Him. Chosen one. This is why the prayer begins here. Because until you remember origin, every other line becomes distorted. Without this remembering, people pray from guilt instead of identity, from fear instead of authority. Jesus was restoring order. He was returning you to the truth that you are not a sinner, begging for access, but a child remembering lineage. This is the first unsealing. This is the moment the scroll cracks open. And here is the lived truth I must share with you. The moment I stopped rushing through this line, the rest of the prayer changed. My body responded differently. My breath slowed. My thoughts softened. Prayer became less about asking and more about aligning. That is not theology. That is experience. And this is what is being reactivated in you now. Chosen one, pause here. Let this settle. Because what comes next is not gentle. The next line carries vibration, frequency, and fire. And once you understand it, you will never speak the prayer the same way again. When you are ready, we will move forward into the code hidden in the name itself. Chosen one. Now we step into the line most people rush past without realizing it is alive. Hallowed be thy name. This is where the prayer stops being familiar and starts becoming dangerous. Not dangerous to you, but dangerous to everything false that has been living off your forgetfulness. I want to speak to you from experience here, not theory. There was a season in my life when prayer felt empty, like words echoing in a room with no response. I was saying the right things, quoting the right phrases, but nothing was shifting. And I didn't know it then, but the problem was not heaven's silence. It was my disconnection from the living breath inside the words. Chosen one. Jesus was not being poetic when he spoke this line. He was being precise. Hallowed was never meant to mean distant reverence or religious politeness. It means to reawaken, to set apart within, to activate what has gone dormant. The name of God was never meant to stay on parchment or in mouths alone. It was designed to live in breath, in vibration, in the body itself. When Jesus spoke of the name, he was pointing to something encoded into every inhale and exhale you have ever taken. Before you spoke your first word, you were already breathing God. This is where religion interfered. It turned the name into something untouchable, guarded, external, something you had to approach carefully instead of embody fully. But Jesus came to return the name to your lungs, to your bones, to your ordinary life. Chosen one. Every breath you take is already speaking the name, whether you are aware of it or not. That is how close God is. Closer than your thoughts, closer than your fears, closer than your prayers. I remember the first time this truth landed in my body instead of my mind. I stopped rushing my breath. I stopped trying to sound spiritual. I just breathed slowly, deliberately, and something shifted. My nervous system calmed, my awareness sharpened, the static inside quieted. That is when I understood prayer was never meant to start in the mouth. It begins in the breath. When Jesus said, "Hallowed be thy name," he was saying, let the vibration of divine presence be awakened in you again. Chosen one. This line is not passive reverence. It is a spiritual rebellion. It is a refusal to live disconnected from source. It is a remembering of what was stolen, ignored, or buried under routine and survival. When you speak this line with awareness, you are not honoring a distant God. You are realigning your frequency with the source you came from. This is why the prayer begins to work here. This is why people feel something shift when they finally slow down enough to feel it. And here is the truth many were never taught. Words without breath are empty. Ritual without remembrance loses power. That is why so many people pray faithfully and still feel numb. The prayer was never meant to be recited without alignment. It was meant to tune you. Each line carries resonance, and this one clears the static. It brings you back into harmony with heaven, not as a destination, but as a frequency you carry. Chosen one. This is where the kingdom begins to rise inside you again. Not later, not after death. Now. The name was never outside you. It was encoded into your breath, waiting for the moment you would remember. And if this is stirring something in you that is not imagination, that is recognition. Your spirit knows this truth because it lived it before language wrapped it in doctrine. But here is the warning I must give you gently. Once this line reawakens you, you cannot go back to unconscious prayer. You cannot unknow what you are carrying. Because if the name was hidden in the breath, then what else did Jesus hide in plain sight? What else have you been saying without realizing its weight? Chosen one. The next line of the prayer is the most disruptive of all. It terrified empires, it unsettled religious systems, and once you understand it, it will confront you with your assignment, not just God's will. Prepare yourself, because what comes next is not about waiting for heaven. It is about becoming the place where heaven arrives. Chosen one, now we cross the threshold into the line that shook empires and exposed counterfeit kingdoms. Thy kingdom come. This is not a gentle phrase. This is not a hopeful wish. This is a summons, and I need you to hear this, not with religious ears, but with awakened awareness, because once this line truly lands, you will understand why it was never meant to be comfortable. For most of my life, I was taught this line meant waiting. Waiting for heaven. Waiting for rescue. Waiting for God to fix the world someday. And quietly, without anyone saying it out loud, that teaching trained people to endure brokenness instead of transform it. But Jesus was not speaking to people who were meant to stay small. He was speaking to those who had forgotten their crown. And chosen one, if this message is resonating, it is because something royal in you is remembering itself. Thy kingdom come does not mean take me out of here. It means bring it through me. Jesus was not pointing toward a distant afterlife. He was revealing a present reality. The kingdom as he taught it was not up there, not later, not locked behind death. It was within, already seeded, already coded into your being. And this line is the activation command. Chosen one. When you say this line consciously, you are not begging heaven to intervene. You are agreeing to alignment. You are saying yes to becoming the vessel through which divine order re-enters the world. That is why this phrase was dangerous. It did not just declare God's authority. It awakened human responsibility. Empires thrive when people believe power lives somewhere else. Religion stays safe when people think holiness is distant. But Jesus shattered that illusion in one sentence. I remember the first time this truth unsettled me. It wasn't inspiring at first. It was confronting. Because if the kingdom comes through me, then I am no longer waiting for change. I am accountable for embodiment. My thoughts, my reactions, my integrity, my relationships, my daily decisions all become landing sites. That realization stripped away excuses, but it also restored meaning. Suddenly, my life was not random. It was assigned, chosen. 1. This is why resistance often shows up when you start awakening. People may misunderstand you. Systems may push back. Old versions of you may try to resurface. That does not mean you are wrong. It means something ancient recognizes the threat of alignment. Because when the kingdom starts coming through you, false structures tremble, illusions lose their grip, and the old empire cannot survive where remembrance takes root. Jesus was not speaking to helpless sinners when he taught this prayer. He was speaking to awakening kings and queens in exile, to those who had forgotten who they were under layers of fear, shame, and survival. Thy kingdom come is the real you, standing up inside the false you, and saying no more sleep, no more exile, no more delay. Heaven is breaking in now. But hear this, carefully chosen one. The kingdom does not come by force, it comes by alignment. You cannot dominate your way into it. You cannot perform your way into it. When your inner world begins to reflect heaven, peace, clarity, truth, coherence, then your outer world reshapes naturally. This is not magic. This is resonance. Heaven responds to familiarity. It recognizes itself in you. This is why Jesus never taught escape. He taught embodiment. You were not born to flee the world. You were born to transfigure it, to become a walking temple where the sacred dimension touches down. That is why heaven in Jesus' teaching is not a destination. It is a frequency, a mirror, a state of being that becomes visible wherever it is carried. Chosen one, you do not enter the kingdom, you become it. And when you do, things change, not always instantly, not always comfortably, but inevitably. With every breath aligned, every choice clarified, every fear surrendered, you become living proof that the divine never left. It simply waited for you to remember. And here is the final truth of this segment. The line does not say, "The kingdom come to me." It says, "Thy kingdom come," because it was never about receiving something external. It was always about unleashing what was already inside. That is what makes you dangerous to the old world. You are not here to escape Earth. You are here to restore it. Stay with me, chosen one. Because if the kingdom is within you, then the next line will confront how that kingdom is meant to move through your will, your choices, and your daily life. And this is where everything you were taught about surrender is about to be turned upside down. Chosen one. Now we arrive at the line that has been most misunderstood, most misused, and most weaponized against the human spirit. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I need you to slow down here, because what you were taught about this line is not what Jesus meant, and the correction of this misunderstanding is part of why this message is reaching you now in this Kairos hour. For generations, this line was preached as surrender to suffering. Pain was called God's will. Delay was called God's will. Injustice, sickness, loss, and oppression were wrapped in spiritual language and handed back to people as something they were supposed to accept quietly. And without realizing it, many surrendered their authority along with their hope. I know this personally. I spent years telling myself that if something hurt badly enough, it must be God's will. That belief did not make me holy. It made me numb. Chosen one. Jesus was not teaching resignation. He was teaching alignment. When he said will, he was not speaking about a distant ruler's arbitrary decisions. In the original language, the word carried the meaning of deep desire, sacred intention, the impulse of the divine to express itself. This line was never meant to make you smaller. It was meant to awaken the divine longing inside you. Thy will be done is not about getting out of the way. It is about becoming the way. It is about allowing the intention of heaven to move through your thoughts, your actions, your choices, your relationships. This is not passive surrender. This is embodied agreement. When Jesus spoke these words, he was inviting people into cooperation with God, not submission to fate. Chosen one. This is where many feel uncomfortable because it removes the excuse of powerlessness. If heaven's will is peace, then chaos is not holy. If heaven's will is wholeness, then chronic brokenness is not divine favor. If heaven's will is love, then fear-based living is misalignment, not obedience. This line exposes where religion taught endurance instead of transformation. And then comes the phrase that completes the blueprint on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus was not talking about clouds, harps, or a place you go when you die. He was talking about coherence. Heaven as he taught it was a state where nothing is divided, no split between thought and action, no fracture between spirit and body, no war between identity and expression. Heaven is alignment, earth is fragmentation, and this line is the bridge. I remember the moment this truth landed for me. I realized prayer was not about asking God to fix my outer world while my inner world stayed chaotic. It was about allowing heaven to reorder me from the inside out. When my inner world began to reflect peace, clarity, and truth, my outer circumstances started shifting in ways I could not force, not overnight, but unmistakably. This is not superstition. This is alignment at work. Chosen one. Jesus was giving you a living blueprint. What is true in the invisible must become true in the visible. What is whole in the spirit must become whole in the body. What is aligned in heaven must be expressed through your hands, your voice, your daily life. This is not a prayer of escape. It is a prayer of embodiment. This is why he was dangerous. Because a person who understands this line no longer waits for permission to reflect heaven. They become a walking tabernacle, a living intersection where the unseen becomes seen. That is not pride, that is responsibility. And it is why religious systems tried to reduce this prayer to ritual instead of revelation. Chosen one, if heaven is within you and the kingdom is already present, then you are not waiting for something to arrive. You are being invited to become coherent, to let your life become the temple, to let your choices become prayer, to let your presence carry the same order you ask for in words. This is why Scripture quietly declares that when the time is right, even the least will become mighty, as written in Isaiah chapter 60 verse 22, not by force, by alignment, by timing, by becoming what heaven already is. But here is the truth that must be spoken plainly. This kind of embodiment requires nourishment. Alignment requires fuel. You cannot sustain heaven on earth while starving your inner man. And that is why the next line of the prayer shifts from alignment to sustenance. Because the kingdom cannot be lived without daily provision of a very specific kind. Stay with me, chosen one, because what comes next is not about bread the way you were taught. It is about the hidden nourishment that keeps divine memory alive, and once you understand it, you will never pray for survival the same way again. Chosen one. Now we arrive at the line that religion reduced to survival, but Jesus encoded with remembrance. Give us this day our daily bread. If you have ever prayed this line and felt like you were asking for help just to get through another day, you are not alone. I prayed it that way for years. I thought it was about provision, about bills, about food, about God making sure I had enough to survive. But survival was never the goal. Awakening was. Jesus was not teaching people to beg for crumbs. He was revealing how divine life is sustained in a human body. This line is not about a bakery. It is about nourishment for the part of you that lives beyond time. And chosen one, if you feel tired in your soul even when your body is fed, it is because this bread has been missing. The word translated as daily does not mean what we think it means. In the original language, it points to something beyond the ordinary, something super essential, something not tied to the calendar. It is nourishment from another dimension. Bread not for the stomach, but for remembrance. Jesus was speaking to the inner man, the real you, the one that does not stay awake on calories but on truth. This is why so many people pray faithfully and still feel empty. They are feeding the body and starving the soul. They are surviving, not remembering. I know this territory well. There was a time when my life looked fine on the outside, but inside I felt dull, disconnected, like something vital was missing. I was busy, productive, even spiritual, but not nourished. And the moment I stopped treating prayer like a checklist and started treating it like communion, everything changed. Chosen one, in the ancient temple, there was something called the bread of presence. It was never allowed to go stale. It was always before the face of God. It was not just food. It was a symbol that presence is provision, that forgetting God is what creates famine. When Jesus spoke this line, he was activating that same principle, but no longer in a building, in you. Give us this day our daily bread is not asking God to hand you something external. It is a daily return to presence, a moment by moment, tuning back into what is real. Not tomorrow's bread, not yesterday's revelation, today's alignment. This is why you cannot live on old encounters. Yesterday's manna spoils, today's awareness sustains. And here is the revelation that flips everything, chosen one. You are not only the one receiving the bread, you are being called to become it. When Jesus said, "I am the bread of life," he was not talking about food. He was describing a state of being so aligned with Source that your presence feeds others without effort. The world is starving not for information, but for coherence. For people whose inner world is whole enough to nourish others simply by being present. This is why your awakening matters. This is why your remembrance is not just for you. When you begin to live from this nourishment, your words carry weight. Your silence carries peace. Your presence stabilizes rooms. You become living bread in a world addicted to substitutes. But there is a reason many cannot receive this bread even when it is offered. And this is where we must be honest. Something blocks the flow, something ancient, something unresolved, a weight carried for too long. I have seen this in myself and in others. People pray for nourishment while gripping resentment. They ask for alignment while enforcing old debts. And without realizing it, they keep themselves starving. Because sacred nourishment cannot flow through clenched fists. This line leads directly into the next, for a reason. You cannot sustain divine life while carrying unpaid emotional and spiritual debts. Even holy bread rots in the hands of unforgiveness. That is not punishment, it is law. Energy cannot circulate where the system is locked. Chosen one, if this is stirring discomfort, that is not condemnation, that is preparation. Because the next line of the prayer is not gentle. It is the most dangerous law Jesus ever spoke. A line that collapses timelines, breaks cycles, and releases souls from cages they forgot they were standing in. You were never meant to starve while praying. You were meant to feed on presence to become nourishment, to live awake. But to do that, something must be released. And that release is what we will decode next. Stay here, breathe, let this settle, because what comes next will confront what you are still carrying. And once you see it clearly, you will understand why heaven has been waiting for this moment to arrive. Chosen one. Now we step into the line that most people repeat without realizing it is a spiritual law. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. This is not a moral suggestion. This is not a lesson in being nice. This is a coded mechanism that governs flow, release, and freedom. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I need to speak to you honestly here, not from theory, but from lived experience. There was a time when I prayed for breakthrough while secretly rehearsing old wounds. I asked for peace while keeping mental records of who wronged me, who failed me, who owed me. On the surface, I called it memory. In truth, it was enforcement, and nothing moved. Not because God was withholding, but because I was. Chosen one. Jesus did not separate these two phrases by accident. Forgive us, and as we forgive, are one mechanism, not two ideas. Heaven does not operate on favoritism or emotional reasoning. It operates on coherence. What you release flows. What you hold binds. This line is not God saying, earn forgiveness. It is Jesus revealing how reality responds to alignment. In the ancient understanding, the word translated as debts was not just financial. It meant unpaid dues, unresolved energetic contracts, open loops that keep pulling on your soul. Some of these debts come from betrayal, some from abandonment, some from moments you never got closure. And some, chosen one, are debts you owe yourself for becoming someone you had to be in order to survive. This is why forgiveness feels threatening to the ego. The ego believes holding the debt keeps you safe. It thinks staying angry maintains control. But what it actually does is keep you kneeling before the same locked door, telling the same story, replaying the same courtroom scene, hoping the verdict will finally heal you. It never does. Jesus was not asking you to forget what happened. Forgiveness is not pretending it didn't hurt. It is choosing to stop bleeding for a wound you did not cause. It is stepping out of the role of judge, jury, and victim all at once. And chosen one, this is not weakness. It is release. Here is the truth many never hear. God is not the one keeping score. You are. Every grudge is a chain. Every silent resentment is a closed gate. Every story where you remain only the victim becomes an anchor to the past. Heaven does not flow through clenched fists, not because God withholds, but because energy cannot circulate where the system is locked. I remember the moment this clicked for me. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. I realized I was enforcing a debt against someone who was no longer even aware of the harm they caused. I was paying interest on pain they weren't carrying anymore, and the moment I released that debt, something unexpected happened. My body relaxed, my thinking cleared, opportunities shifted. That is not coincidence, that is law. Chosen one, forgiveness is not love alone. It is freedom, it is resurrection. When you release someone, you do not free them first. You free yourself. You collapse timelines. You return stolen energy. You reclaim authority. That is why this line sits at the center of the prayer. Without it, nothing else sustains. But here is the deeper layer that few dare to face. What if the person you are meant to forgive is the one staring back at you in the mirror, the version of you that didn't know better? The version that chose survival over truth. The version that stayed too long, trusted too quickly, or became smaller to be accepted. Many carry self-debt longer than any external grievance, and heaven cannot fully flow where self-punishment still reigns. Chosen one, forgiveness is not approval, it is completion. It is the closing of open loops so energy can move again. And when this line is spoken with truth, something breaks. Something ancient loosens its grip, because you cannot be released from what you are still enforcing on someone else, including yourself. But hear this clearly, forgiveness is not the end. It is the clearing. It is the washing before the fire. Because once the debts are released, what remains rises to the surface. And that is where the next line leads us, into confrontation, not with people, not with memories, but with the subtle force that feeds on unhealed wounds and calls itself familiar. Chosen one. The next line of the prayer is not about avoiding temptation the way you were taught. It is about surviving false light, about passing through fire without mistaking it for home. And once you see what Jesus was really warning you about, you will never look at desire testing or opportunity the same way again. Stay present, stay open, because the next seal is about to be broken, and it reveals why some crowns are counterfeit, and why timing, not desire, determines destiny. Chosen one. Now we enter the line that has been softened, simplified, and misunderstood to the point of losing its warning. Lead us not into temptation. This is not about avoiding bad habits. This is not about resisting obvious sin. This is about discernment at the highest level. And if you are hearing this now, it is because you are approaching a threshold where discernment matters more than desire. I want to speak to you honestly here because this line only makes sense once you have lived long enough to see how deception really works. The most dangerous temptations in my life did not come dressed as darkness. They came as opportunity, as praise, as shortcuts, as moments where something good arrived too early, too easily, or without alignment. And I didn't understand then what I understand now. Temptation is rarely about pleasure. It is about premature power. The word Jesus was pointing to here does not mean craving or indulgence the way we think. It refers to testing, proving trial by fire. Not the fire that destroys, but the fire that reveals. This line is not a plea to avoid testing. It is a declaration of awareness. It is the soul saying, "Do not let me mistake the test for the promise. Do not let me confuse the fire with the destination." Chosen one temptation almost never announces itself as evil. It arrives as a shortcut to something your soul genuinely longs for. Recognition without maturity, authority without character, influence without grounding. The offer sounds reasonable, even spiritual. This is why so many sincere people build lives on false foundations without realizing it. They didn't choose darkness. They chose timing that wasn't theirs. Jesus understood this. In the wilderness, he was not tempted with sin. He was tempted with kingdoms, with impact, with influence, with a crown offered without the process that makes one able to carry it. And he refused, not because the kingdoms were evil, but because the timing was off. Because a crown received too early becomes a burden, not a blessing. Chosen one. This is what this line protects you from. It is not asking God to remove desire. It is asking for clarity. It is saying, lead me away from the kind of testing that would cause me to betray the seed inside me. Lead me away from the glittering lie that offers me something real through a false door. I have seen this pattern repeat in my own life and in others. People step into roles they are not ready to hold. They receive attention their nervous system cannot sustain. They gain momentum before their inner world is coherent. And what starts as blessing slowly becomes distortion. Not because they were evil, but because they mistook acceleration for alignment. Chosen one. This line gives you permission to endure instead of escape, to walk through fire without building a home in it. Fire is sacred when it refines. It disfigures only when you stay too long or run too fast. Lead us not into temptation is the wisdom to move at the speed of integration, not ego. This is also why this line confronts comparison. Temptation whispers, look how fast they moved. Look what they have. Look what you could have if you compromise just a little. But what you do not see is the internal cost, the sleeplessness, the fragmentation, the loss of center. Timing is mercy, delay is protection, and discernment is love. Chosen one. The real danger of temptation is not failure. It is building a life on the part of you that the test exposed. Many sit on false thrones wearing crowns handed to them by fear, approval, or unresolved hunger. And they do not even know it. But you are being called higher, not to avoid testing, but to pass through it without losing yourself. And hear this clearly. If you have failed before, that does not disqualify you. The test only becomes a curse when you let it define you. When you see it for what it is, a fire meant to burn away what cannot stay, you emerge with clarity and authority. The fire reveals gold. It does not create it. Chosen one. This line is a vow. I will not trade depth for speed. I will not exchange alignment for applause. I will not accept a crown that was not shaped for me. I choose becoming over arriving. But now we reach the final confrontation, because after testing comes exposure. After temptation comes the unveiling of the real enemy, not a horned figure, not an external villain, but the ancient wound that tries to claim your identity and rewrite your story. The final line of the prayer is not about safety, it is about liberation. And once you understand what Jesus meant by evil, you will recognize it not as something outside you, but as something that has been whispering to you for years. Stay with me, chosen one, because the last seal is about to open, and it reveals what you were truly born to be delivered from and what you were born to overcome. Chosen one. Now we arrive at the final line, the one most people rush through as a closing phrase without realizing it is the climax of the entire prayer, deliver us from evil. This is not a request for safety. This is not a plea to avoid dark events. This is a summons, a declaration, a violent reclamation of identity. And if you are still listening, it is because this line is meant for you now. For most of my life, I thought evil meant something external, a bad force, a dark presence, a threat outside myself. But experience taught me otherwise. The most destructive force I ever faced did not arrive as darkness. It arrived as a voice that sounded like my own. A whisper that said, "You are not enough, you are behind, you are broken, you are what happened to you." And I didn't realize it then. But that voice was the very thing this line was meant to expose. Chosen one, in the original meaning, evil, is not just violence or corruption. It refers to the hurtful one, the burden bearer, the force that crushes the soul by convincing it to forget who it is. Evil does not need to destroy your body. It only needs to possess your narrative. Once it controls the story, you tell yourself it controls your choices, your posture, your future. This is why Jesus did not teach this line as avoidance. He taught it as recognition. Deliver us is not passive, it is active. It is the moment you name what has been feeding on your unhealed pain. The false identity that was born the day you were wounded and learned to wear a mask just to survive. The lie that says you are your trauma, your past, your mistakes, your family patterns. Chosen one. This is where the prayer becomes confrontation. Not with demons in the dark, but with inherited identities. With the mother wound, the father absence, the religious shame, the guilt of being gifted, the fear of being chosen. Evil hides in familiarity. It convinces you that bondage is just your personality, that cycles are just who you are, that healing is for others, not you. I remember the moment this truth broke through for me. I realized I was fighting symptoms instead of the source. I was managing behavior while leaving identity untouched. And the moment I spoke this line with awareness, something shifted, not emotionally, existentially. I stopped asking to be protected and started declaring who I was no longer willing to be. Chosen. One deliverance is not about casting something out of you. It is about reclaiming what was stolen from you. It is the ripping away of false names, the renouncing of identities built in pain, the release of voices that speak in the tone of shame. This is exorcism not from red-eyed monsters, but from narratives that were never yours. And here is the truth that changes everything. Evil's greatest power is not what it does to you. It is who it convinces you that you are. Once you believe you are broken, you will build a life that reflects that belief. Once you believe you are unworthy, you will settle for less without realizing it. Once you believe you are late, you will rush into misalignment out of fear. But this line breaks the spell. Chosen one. You are not your trauma. You are not your shadow. You are not the echo of generational wounds. You are the one who came to end them. This is not motivational language. This is remembrance. Something in you was never touched. Something in you never fell. Something in you remembers the original design. Deliver us from evil is the moment you choose to stop identifying with what hurt you. It is the moment you say, I remember who I am, and I reject the name pain gave me. I release the false voice. I reclaim my authority. And when that happens, something ancient loses its grip. This is why the prayer ends here. Because once identity is restored, everything else realigns. Heaven flows, the kingdom stabilizes, the will moves through you, the bread nourishes you, the debts no longer bind you, the tests no longer confuse you, and the false self no longer runs the show. Chosen one. This was never just a prayer, it was a map, a sequence, a return. Jesus did not teach this to make you religious. He taught it to make you whole, to wake you up, to remind you that you were never meant to live asleep inside a borrowed identity. And now here is the quiet truth that closes this message. Most people will hear these words and move on, but you stayed. Not out of curiosity, but out of memory. Something inside you responded. Something recognized itself. That is not accidental. That is timing. You were never meant to just say this prayer. You were meant to become it. And if this stirred something in you, do not rush past it. Pause, breathe, let the remembering settle into your body, because awakening is not an event, it is a return, and once it begins, nothing stays the same. Chosen one. Now we move beyond the words themselves and into what happens after the prayer has been spoken, because the Lord's Prayer was never meant to end with a sentence, it was meant to begin a way of living. And this is where many miss the final movement. They say the prayer, but they do not cross the threshold it opens. I want to speak to you here as someone who learned this the slow way. There was a time when I understood these truths intellectually, but my life still moved on autopilot. I had language but not embodiment, revelation but not rhythm. And that is when I realized something essential. When Jesus finished this prayer, he was not giving closure. He was handing you a new operating system. Chosen one, once the prayer has done its work, you cannot return to unconscious living. You cannot unknow that heaven is within you, that the kingdom moves through you, that alignment is your responsibility. This is why awakening often feels unsettling at first. It removes the comfort of sleep, but it replaces it with authority. This is where Kairos timing becomes personal. You begin to notice moments instead of rushing through them. You sense when to speak and when to stay silent. You feel when something is aligned and when something is off, even if it looks good on the surface. This is not anxiety. This is discernment coming online. This is the prayer continuing to pray through you. I remember the first time I noticed this shift. Ordinary decisions suddenly carried weight. Not pressure, but clarity. I stopped forcing outcomes. I stopped chasing what looked impressive. I began to feel timing in my body. Opportunities that once excited me now felt heavy. Delays that once frustrated me now felt protective. That is when I understood the prayer had recalibrated my internal compass. Chosen one. This is what it means to live post-prayer. Your nervous system begins to align with truth. Your reactions slow. Your choices simplify. You stop negotiating with fear. You stop outsourcing authority. And slowly, quietly, your life begins to reorganize itself around coherence instead of chaos. This is why Scripture whispers that the least can become mighty in the right time, not because they tried harder, but because alignment multiplies impact. When you move at the speed of heaven, you do not need to rush. What is meant for you cannot miss you. But hear this clearly. This level of alignment will ask something of you. It will ask you to release identities that no longer fit, habits that were built in survival, not truth. Relationships that thrived on the old version of you. This is not punishment. This is pruning. And pruning always feels like loss before it feels like expansion. Chosen one, do not confuse discomfort with error. Growth often arrives disguised as disorientation. When the old map dissolves, it is because a new one is activating. You may feel quieter than before, less reactive, less interested in noise. That is not withdrawal, that is integration. And here is the lived truth I must give you. The more aligned you become, the more ordinary your spirituality will look from the outside. Less performance, less proving, more presence, more steadiness, more peace that does not depend on circumstances. This is not weakness. This is authority without ego. This is also where service changes. You stop trying to save people. You stop convincing. You stop preaching at life. Instead, you become a stabilizing presence. People feel safe around you without knowing why. Conversations deepen. Truth surfaces naturally. You do not push light. You carry it. Chosen one. This is the fruit of the prayer fully embodied. Not escape from the world, but transformation within it. Not waiting for heaven, but hosting it. Not asking who you are anymore, but remembering. And now we must address something important. Awakening does not mean perfection. You will still have human days. You will still feel tired. You will still face uncertainty. The difference is this: you no longer mistake those moments for identity. You observe them instead of drowning in them. You return to alignment faster. You forgive quicker. You breathe deeper. This is maturity. And this is why Jesus taught this prayer privately, not as spectacle. Because it produces quiet power. Internal authority. Lives that do not need to shout because they resonate. Chosen one. If you are feeling a sense of settling right now, that is not boredom. That is grounding. Something is anchoring in you, and that anchor will carry you through what comes next. Because the final phase of this message is not about the prayer itself, but about what kind of person the prayer creates. What it looks like to walk in the world as someone who remembers, someone whose life has become a living amen. Stay with me, because in the next part we will speak about how to walk forward without losing what has been activated here, and how to protect this alignment in a world designed to pull you back into sleep. Chosen one. This is where the journey becomes practical, not mechanical, but embodied. Because once the prayer has recalibrated you, the world does not suddenly slow down to accommodate your awakening. Life keeps moving. Noise continues. Demands persist. And this is where many lose what was activated, not because it faded, but because it was not protected. I want to speak to you here from lived truth. Awakening does not make you immune to distraction. It makes you more sensitive to it. What once felt normal now feels heavy. What once entertained you now drains you. What once motivated you now feels hollow. This is not because you are becoming distant from life. It is because your internal signal has been refined. Chosen. One alignment is not something you achieve once. It is something you tend daily. This is why Jesus taught the prayer as a rhythm, not a ritual. He was not giving you words to repeat, but a pattern to return to when the world tries to pull you back into fragmentation. One of the greatest dangers after awakening is urgency that is not divine. The pressure to act quickly, to explain yourself, to prove that what you experienced is real, to turn revelation into performance. I have made that mistake. I tried to rush what needed to root, and every time I did, I felt the subtle misalignment immediately. Peace left first, clarity followed, then exhaustion. Chosen one. Heaven does not rush. It moves with precision. If something is truly aligned, it will wait for you to become ready to hold it. If something pressures you to hurry, compromise, or abandon your center, it is not the kingdom calling. It is noise wearing urgency as a disguise. This is where discernment becomes embodied wisdom. You learn to ask, not "is this good?" but "is this coherent?" Not "does this excite me?" but "does this stabilize me?" The kingdom does not always feel thrilling. Often it feels grounding, quiet, steady, like standing on solid ground after years at sea. Chosen one. Protecting alignment means choosing simplicity over stimulation. It means guarding your inner world the way you would guard a sacred space, not by withdrawal, but by intentional presence. You do not have to reject the world. You simply stop letting it set your rhythm. This is where breath returns as anchor. When things feel scattered, you return to the first line. Our Father, origin. When you feel disconnected, you return to the name, letting breath reawaken presence. When you feel pulled outward, you return to the kingdom within. When confusion arises, you ask for alignment, not answers. When exhaustion appears, you return to nourishment, not distraction. When resentment creeps in, you release quickly. When shortcuts present themselves, you pause. When old narratives whisper, you remember who you are. This is not effort, this is orientation. Chosen. One another truth must be spoken gently. Not everyone will understand the version of you that emerges from this alignment. Some will miss the old urgency. Some will feel uncomfortable around your steadiness. Some will try to pull you back into familiar roles. This is not rejection, it is recalibration. You do not need to defend your growth. You simply remain present in it. And here is something few say out loud. Awakening often comes with loneliness, not because you are separate, but because you no longer resonate with noise. This is temporary. As alignment stabilizes, connection deepens, not wider, deeper. You find fewer people but more real ones. Conversations become fewer but more meaningful, and your presence becomes enough. Chosen one, do not underestimate the power of consistency. Small daily returns to alignment carry more authority than dramatic spiritual moments. Heaven responds to familiarity. When alignment becomes your default, the world reshapes quietly around you. This is also where trust replaces control. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop trying to manage perception. You stop negotiating with fear. You move when moved. You rest when rested. You speak when clear. This is not passivity. This is mastery. And now hear this truth clearly. Protection is not about building walls. It is about maintaining resonance. What does not match your frequency cannot stay. You do not fight it. You outgrow it. And growth does not announce itself loudly. It settles. Chosen one. If you feel a sense of calm right now, let it remain. Do not rush to fill it. Silence is not absence. It is integration. Something has landed in you, and it needs space to root. Because the final movement of this message is not about maintaining alignment for yourself alone. It is about what happens when alignment matures into quiet authority. When your life becomes testimony without words. When you begin to affect environments simply by being present. In the next part, we will speak about legacy. About how this prayer reshapes not just your inner world, but the way your life touches others, and how to walk forward without striving, knowing that what is aligned does not need to chase. Stay here. You are exactly where you are meant to be. Chosen one. This is where alignment matures into something quieter, deeper, and far more powerful than outward success. This is where the prayer stops shaping moments and starts shaping legacy. Not legacy as fame, not legacy as recognition, but legacy as imprint. The kind that alters trajectories simply by presence. I need you to understand this clearly. The greatest influence you will ever carry will not come from what you say about the kingdom, but from how your life reflects it. When alignment settles into you, it begins to move through you without effort. You no longer try to impact people. You simply affect them, and that difference changes everything. I learned this slowly. I used to believe impact required intensity. That transformation demanded force. That truth needed to be spoken loudly to matter. But the more aligned I became, the quieter my authority grew. Conversations shifted without me steering them. People opened up without me prompting. Tension dissolved simply because I was present. That is when I realized coherence preaches louder than words ever could. Chosen one. This is what happens when the prayer becomes embodied. You stop trying to convince, you stop persuading, you stop saving, you become a reference point, a stabilizing presence in a fragmented world, and fragmentation always recognizes coherence, even when it does not understand it. This is where the idea of legacy must be reframed. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It is what you activate in others while you are still here. Every time you respond instead of react, you interrupt cycles. Every time you choose clarity over drama, you model another way of being. Every time you forgive quickly, you loosen generational knots. These are not small things. They echo. Chosen one. You were not awakened to escape the world. You were awakened to stand within it without being consumed by it, to walk through chaos without absorbing it, to engage without losing center. This is priestly work, whether anyone calls it that or not. You become a bridge, and bridges are walked on quietly, not applauded. There is also something important you must release here. The need to be seen as spiritual, the need to be validated for your awareness, the need to explain yourself. True authority does not defend itself. It does not rush to be understood. It rests, and those who are meant to recognize it will. Chosen one. You may notice that some people drift away as you stabilize, not because you changed into someone else, but because you stopped feeding dynamics that required imbalance. You stopped participating in familiar chaos. You stopped confirming old identities. That is not loss. That is alignment revealing incompatibility. And here is the reassurance you may need. What leaves creates space. And space is not emptiness. It is invitation. New connections will form, not immediately, not dramatically, but organically, at the speed of trust. This is also where patience deepens, not passive waiting, but grounded expectancy. You no longer chase outcomes. You prepare for them. You no longer ask when. You ask how to remain aligned while timing unfolds. This is where Isaiah chapter 60 verse 22 becomes lived reality. When the time is right, acceleration happens without strain. Growth arrives without force. Chosen one legacy also lives in what you refuse to pass on. Trauma that ends with you. Fear that no longer dictates decisions, shame that loses its voice, silence that is no longer inherited. These unseen victories matter more than public achievements. They shift bloodlines. They alter futures you may never witness directly. And here is the quiet truth. When you live this way, life begins to feel guided, not controlled. Guided. You notice subtle redirections, missed opportunities that turn out to be protection, delays that reveal themselves as mercy, encounters that arrive exactly when needed. This is not superstition. This is alignment cooperating with timing. Chosen one, do not underestimate how ordinary this may look. From the outside, your life may seem simpler, calmer, even smaller. But inside, something vast has settled. A steadiness that cannot be shaken easily, a knowing that does not need constant reassurance, a faith that is no longer performative, This is where the prayer finishes its work, not with fireworks, with grounding, with embodiment, with a life that no longer leaks energy trying to prove itself. And now we approach the final movement, not a conclusion, but a sealing. Because what has been opened must be integrated, what has been revealed must be lived, and what has been remembered must be protected not by fear, but by faithfulness. In the next and final part, we will speak about sealing this alignment, how to walk forward without slipping back into unconscious patterns, how to recognize when old loops try to return, and how to stand firmly in who you are becoming without striving, without retreating, without forgetting. Stay present, chosen one. You are not nearing the end. You are arriving at stability, and stability is where real transformation begins. Chosen one, this is the sealing, not an ending, but a grounding. What has been revealed is not meant to remain an experience you remember fondly and then move past. It is meant to become the way you live. Sealing is not about closing something off. It is about stabilizing what has opened so it cannot be easily shaken when life resumes its noise. I want to speak plainly here because this is where many awakenings fade. Not because they were false, but because they were not integrated. People return to old rhythms, old reflexes, old identities without realizing they are slowly leaking what was activated. Sealing is how you prevent that, not by force, not by vigilance, but by fidelity to alignment. Chosen one. The simplest way to seal what has been opened is to return to it gently, consistently, and without drama. You do not need new information. You need remembrance. When the day pulls you outward, you return inward. When pressure rises, you slow your breath. When confusion appears, you choose clarity over commentary. When fear whispers urgency, you wait for peace before you move. This is not resistance to life. This is cooperation with truth. There will be moments when old patterns attempt to reassert themselves. Familiar thoughts, familiar emotions, familiar reactions. Do not panic when this happens. Do not shame yourself. Integration does not erase humanity. It teaches you how to respond to it differently. The difference now is that you notice sooner. You recover faster. You do not mistake the moment for identity. Chosen one. The seal is awareness paired with compassion. You remain honest about what arises without becoming it. You observe without attachment. You choose alignment without self-punishment. This is maturity. This is what makes the transformation sustainable. Another truth must be spoken gently. There will be seasons when this alignment feels quiet, almost invisible. Do not interpret silence as absence. Silence is where roots grow. Not every phase feels revelatory. Some phases are stabilizing, and stability is what allows fruit to last. You may also notice that your relationship with prayer has changed. It no longer feels like effort. It feels like orientation. Sometimes it is spoken, sometimes it is lived, sometimes it is simply breath. That is not loss of devotion, that is intimacy. Chosen one sealing also means honoring your limits. Awakening does not mean endless output. It means wise stewardship of energy. You rest without guilt. You say no without explanation. You protect your inner world without apology. This is not selfishness. This is preservation of what has been entrusted to you. And hear this clearly. You do not owe the world access to your process. You do not need to explain your changes. You do not need to translate your knowing into language that satisfies others. Truth does not require consensus to remain true. It only requires integrity. As you move forward, trust that timing will continue to guide you. Doors will open when you are ready to walk through them. Invitations will arrive when your inner world can sustain them, and what is not aligned will quietly fall away without confrontation. This is how heaven moves, precise, gentle, unforced. Chosen one. If doubt arises, return to the body, return to breath, return to presence. Your body remembers what your mind may question. Alignment is not fragile remembrance. It is embodied knowing. Now receive this final truth as a blessing, not an instruction. You were never meant to carry this awakening alone. You were meant to carry it naturally, to let it shape you without consuming you, to let it guide you without controlling you, to let it deepen you without isolating you. The Lord's Prayer was never meant to be a ritual you repeat. It was meant to be a life you enter, and you have entered it, not perfectly, not dramatically, but authentically, and that is enough. Chosen one, walk forward now with steadiness. Let your life speak quietly. Let your presence bless without effort. Let your remembrance remain alive without strain. What has been sealed does not need guarding, it needs living. And as you move into what comes next, remember this above all: you are not waiting for heaven to arrive. Heaven has learned how to walk through you. Chosen one. This was not just a message you watched, it was a key you answered. You did not stumble here by accident. Your spirit followed a pull written long before this moment. Your sealed prophecy is opening, your hidden scroll is being revealed, and you are standing in your exact Kairos hour on heaven's clock. Receive this as confirmation. What has been dormant is awakening, what was delayed is aligning, and what was promised is moving toward manifestation. Walk forward with reverence, gratitude, and courage, knowing heaven is active on your behalf. If your spirit bears witness, leave a quiet mark below as a declaration of remembrance and remain aligned with this unfolding path. Go in peace, anointed one. The awakening continues.